Hey there, and welcome to another edition of GeoJesser Explains. This is a sometimes series in which I talk about really any topic I feel somewhat well versed in, hopefully loosely at least tied to geography in general to keep with the channel's theme. So, this one's been percolating for a while. Today, I'm going to talk about a subject that shouldn't be controversial, but is. Because this is meant to be a geography channel and not a let's stir up lots of angry comments channel, I'm going to try to come at it from a historical and geographic angle and then tie in some of the modern debate, so to speak, at the end. So what is this highly controversial, scary, angry, comment-generating subject? Vaccines. More specifically, I'm going to give a somewhat brief history of the first actual vaccine and how it eventually led to the successful eradication of a terrifying, inescapable, deadly disease. It is the only disease that has ever been successfully eradicated by purposeful effort on a worldwide scale, and it's a lesson in how, with a lot of cooperation, a smart use of statistics, and understanding the needs of individual communities, we can accomplish great things. In 1980, the World Health Organization declared that smallpox had been eradicated. No cases of smallpox have been reported since then, after 3,000 years of epidemics and fear. According to the CDC, smallpox was a serious infectious disease caused by the variola virus. It caused a fever and a distinctive progressive skin rash. 30% of people who contracted it died, and many survivors ended up with extensive scarring, especially on the face. It was spread by direct, prolonged, face-to-face contact. Once sores first appeared in the mouth and throat early in the infection, droplets from sneezing or coughing could spread the virus, and they remained contagious until all of the scabs had fallen off. In addition, any clothing or bedding or other surfaces they came in contact with had the potential to transmit the disease even if the person wasn't there. Smallpox was documented for thousands of years. It spread from Asia to northern Africa and then up into the Iberian Peninsula. By the 11th century, it had reached all of Europe. The Portuguese brought it to Western Africa when they began to trade there, and from there and from Europe, it spread via colonizers and the slave trade to the Americas. By the 17th century, it had reached North America, and by the 18th century, it was in Australia as well. There was no effective treatment, but for hundreds of years, the practice of variolation had helped to control outbreaks in some areas. This process involved intentionally infecting a healthy person with smallpox by scratching the material from smallpox sores into their skin. They usually contracted smallpox, but it was usually a milder case than if they had caught it naturally, and more people survived than those who caught it naturally. It was an imperfect solution. In 1796, English doctor Edward Jenner made the connection between a milder disease called cowpox and smallpox. He noticed that milkmaids who had contracted cowpox from the cows they worked with were protected from smallpox as well. He tested his theory by inoculating his gardener's 9-year-old son with material from a cowpox sore. The boy was exposed to smallpox over the following months and years and never contracted it. In 1801, Jenner published his findings in his paper on the origin of the vaccine inoculation. Jenner's discovery proved effective, and over the years the method was refined. At first, it was difficult to store the infectious material long enough to save it between outbreaks. Methods were developed to store the vaccine, and better instruments and techniques were developed for administering it. One common method was arm-to-arm vaccination. When the vaccination was administered, a smallpox scab would form. A physician could then take scrapings from that scab and use it to inoculate the next person. This method was also used to transport the vaccine over long distances. In 1803, King Charles IV of Spain commissioned an expedition to introduce the vaccine to the Spanish colonies. This expedition was called the Royal Philanthropic Expedition. To keep the vaccine viable on the journey across the ocean and from settlement to settlement, orphan children were brought along. The first child was inoculated when they left. Then, a few days later, when the pustule formed, the next child in the chain could be vaccinated. This chain would continue until they reached a population requiring vaccination. From there, fresh material could be harvested and the chain began again. This ingenious, if ethically debatable solution led to some success for the expedition. However, smallpox continued to ravage the Americas and Asia for more than a century after the expedition. The last case of smallpox in Mexico appeared in 1951. In the United States, starting in the mid-19th century, some states began mandating vaccination for schoolchildren. The last smallpox outbreak in the United States occurred in New York City in 1947. Public health experts managed to stop the outbreak in a matter of weeks, with only 2 deaths occurring, by moving quickly to vaccinate 6 million New Yorkers. Smallpox was eliminated in North America in 1952 and in Europe in 1953. However, regular outbreaks still occurred in South America, Africa, and Asia. In 1958, the World Health Organization committed to eradicating the disease worldwide. By 1967, many people in susceptible areas still remained unvaccinated. Efforts turned to containing outbreaks. Higher quality and easier to administer vaccines were developed. A move from mass vaccination to containment aided in the final eradication of the disease. Under containment, instead of actively attempting to vaccinate everyone in a given region, teams would identify individual cases, rush to the scene, isolate the person, and vaccinate anyone who might come in contact with that person. This would break the chain of transmission and contain the outbreak. In 1977, the last endemic case of smallpox was recorded in Somalia. In May 1980, the WHO declared that smallpox had finally been eradicated. The last person to contract smallpox naturally was Ali Mau Malin, a hospital cook in Merka, Somalia. He contracted the disease while riding with 2 smallpox patients in October 1977. He recovered and continued to work in healthcare. He died of malaria on July 22, 2013, while working on the polio eradication campaign. The last person to die of smallpox was Janet Parker, a medical photographer at England's Birmingham University Medical School. She worked 1 floor up from the microbiology department, where they were conducting smallpox research. She contracted the virus from the lab, although it's unclear how, and died on September 11, 1978. The eradication of smallpox is an incredible story of long-term commitment and worldwide dedication. Efforts to control and eradicate other preventable diseases have been attempted by following similar models, but none have been entirely effective. 2 notable cases are measles and polio. So, how do vaccines work? In short, by intentionally introducing material from an infectious disease into the body, the immune system is tricked into attacking and neutralizing the infection. Once the immune system has fought a particular pathogen once, it learns to recognize it and produces antibodies that are tailored to fight it. The next time the disease is encountered, the immune system recognizes it immediately and already has the resources to fight it off. In most cases, a vaccinated person will never even get sick when exposed to the actual disease. Some vaccines confer lifelong immunity, while others need to be boosted. Extensive research goes into the safety, effectiveness, and dosage of a given vaccine. Vaccines are one of the few medical interventions performed on an already healthy person, so it's extremely important to ensure that by administering a vaccine, you're not going to cause more harm than you prevent. Vaccines are very safe, very effective, and vitally important for the health of the population at large. Even though this video is intended to be specifically about the smallpox vaccine and the eradication of smallpox, I wanted to address 3 of the main arguments I hear from people who are hesitant about or against vaccines. The first one is, if you got the vaccine, why do I need to? You're protected, right? The short answer is yes and no. I'm probably protected, but this isn't just about one person. This is about everyone. As we can see from the smallpox story, to finally eradicate the disease, the objective was to vaccinate any person who might come in contact with an infected person. This breaks the chain of transmission and halts an outbreak. We can think of ourselves as a part of a ring of protection around others. The more gaps in that ring, the more opportunities for the disease to break through and spread. It should be noted that vaccines are not 100% effective. A vaccine's efficacy is measured by comparing a group of vaccinated people to a control group of people who received a placebo. The members of the groups are tracked, and the number of people who contract the disease is recorded over a specified period of time. Then the control group is compared to the vaccinated group. If the rates of infection in the vaccinated group are considerably lower than they are in the control group, efficacy can be said to be high. So if a vaccine is said to have 80% efficacy, that doesn't mean that it only works 80% of the time. It means that in a vaccinated population, 80% fewer people will contract the disease when they are exposed to it than in an unvaccinated population. Efficacy is different from effectiveness, which is how the vaccine performs in a community as a whole. Effectiveness can differ from efficacy because the population observed will be bigger and more variable. However, the effectiveness rate has the same meaning as the efficacy rate. That is, in a population of vaccinated folks, for example, 80% fewer people might get sick than in a population of unvaccinated folks. So back to, if you're protected, why do you care if I'm vaccinated? Since nobody can know if the vaccine worked for them, there's always the possibility that even though I got the jab, I'm not as well protected as you might be. So if you got sick and came in contact with me, I might still get sick, and then I might pass the disease on to others. These others may include people who cannot be vaccinated for various reasons, people who have a suppressed immune system for whom vaccines would be less effective, or even ineffective, and those who are at higher risk of complications from the disease even if they are vaccinated. So the more people who are vaccinated, the greater the chance of breaking the chain before the disease can spread further. Really, it comes down to the good of the community versus the desire of a single person. As a member of a society, I am obligated to do what I can to contribute to the good of that society and to protect those within it. If all I have to do is get a shot once in a while, that seems like a small price to pay. Another argument against vaccines I hear are variations on the types of terrible side effects or unintended consequences the vaccines cause. I won't bother to address the vaccines cause autism issue except to say they don't. The one paper that purported to find a causal link was fully and completely debunked and retracted, and the doctor who wrote it lost his license because of his unethical practices. However, yes, sometimes vaccines cause side effects. In fact, a lot of what we call side effects are actually intended effects. When you feel sick, that's your body's immune response to an invading pathogen. Sore throats, fevers, stuffy nose, body aches, those are all the result of inflammation caused by your immune system to fight off a virus or bacteria. So when you get a mild fever or headache or soreness after a shot, that just means your immune system has been notified and is working on the problem. That also isn't to say that if you don't have a side effect, the vaccine didn't work, it's just some people react differently. Sometimes, in very rare cases, a vaccine may cause a more severe reaction, an unintended reaction. While this does happen, it is very unusual, and if there's reason to believe an individual may have a dangerous reaction, doctors will advise against that person being given a vaccine. Which is all the more reason for those of us who can receive it safely to take it. It is very important to remember the vaccines are tested extensively for this very reason. Doctors don't want to cause illness in an otherwise healthy person. It is also important to note that the risks of these severe reactions are much lower than the risks associated with the disease itself. Take measles, for example. Measles is fatal in 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 cases, even in modern times with modern medicine. In contrast, at most, 3 people have ever died as a result of taking the measles vaccine. And it's not even a clear causal link in those 3. 3 out of millions and millions of doses of the vaccine over decades. In more cases of measles, a child can suffer neurological problems. The chances of these occurring after the vaccine are close to 0. So, in a risk-benefit analysis, especially given how very transmissible measles is, the risks associated with contracting measles are considerably higher than any risk associated with taking the vaccine. Some people who are vaccine hesitant or resistant may also bring up the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS, in the United States. They will point out that the number of reports of adverse reactions in that system is fairly high. Understanding what VAERS is may help alleviate some of these concerns. Anytime anyone experiences any kind of adverse reaction from mild soreness to fever to seizures to hospitalization following the administration of a vaccine, that event is reported to VAERS. Even events that cannot be directly attributed to the vaccine may still be reported. For example, if I got the flu shot and then fell out of a tree later that day and broke my arm, that might still be reported to VAERS because I broke my arm soon after taking the flu vaccine. I don't think anyone's going to argue that the vaccine caused the injury. It just so happened that the injury happened shortly after receiving the vaccine. The VAERS raw data cannot be used to identify the severity of reactions to a particular vaccine as is. The data has to be cleaned up and sorted and good statistical methods applied. The reason the database exists is so that the CDC and FDA can track trends. If an unexpectedly high number of people report, for example, fainting shortly after administration of a particular vaccine, there's cause to investigate whether there's a link between the vaccine itself and the fainting. A third argument I hear has to do with suspicions about the financial motivations of doctors, pharmaceutical companies, and insurance companies. Someone might say, for example, that doctors push vaccines on you because they get a kickback from the insurance company for each vaccine they administer. Or one might argue that the pharmaceutical companies are pushing vaccines because they want to sell lots and lots of them to make money. While I'm not here to say that the motives of pharmaceutical companies are pure, nor am I going to argue that the healthcare industry always has a patient's best interest at heart. I will say that this particular argument about vaccines makes no sense. Think about it. A vaccine typically doesn't cost very much. The insurance company shells out however much money to obtain millions of doses, and it's true that some doctors might receive a small bonus if a certain percentage of their patients are vaccinated. This is because vaccinating patients saves the insurance company money. Consider that if you do contract a serious disease, such as polio or measles, and you end up needing additional treatment, those treatments will be considerably more expensive than the vaccine was. If you have to be hospitalized or begin taking long-term medications, or even just an expensive antiviral, this is going to cost your insurance company considerably more money than what the vaccine cost in the first place. Insurance companies are always looking for ways to save money, and one of the ways they do that is by encouraging you to stay as healthy as possible. So even though financial motivations aren't noble, sometimes their goals do align with yours. As for the pharmaceutical companies, well, if you ended up needing extensive medical care because you contracted a disease, the company will make more money on you from buying their medications than they do from selling you a vaccine once. So isn't it in their financial interest to keep you sick? While being dubious about how trustworthy insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies are when it comes to their bottom line is reasonable, attributing financial motives to encouraging vaccination doesn't make any sense when it comes to the drug companies, and it only makes sense in terms of insurance companies because a vaccinated population is a healthy population, which saves the company money. The eradication of smallpox demonstrates that eliminating, or at least controlling, serious diseases is possible, but it requires the cooperation of the entire world, plenty of funding, good record-keeping and education, and the will of the population. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this informative and interesting. If you'd like to see more GeoJesser Explains, or if you have a suggestion for a topic, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you're new here and enjoy my content, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Shout out to my patrons who keep this channel going. You can join my Patreon at patreon.com/GeoJesser. Stay well, and I'll see you next time for more GeoJesser Explains.